Hello strategy gaming enthusiasts, my name is AlzaboHD. In Victoria 3, you can play as the richest and most powerful polities of the modern world, but that's not the Alzabo way. Today we'll be playing as Malaria, also known as Liberia, an unrecognized dictatorship of mosquito mongers and one of the hardest campaigns in the entire game. Join me as we journey black to America as exiled African Americans and form a superpower of freed slaves from a tribe that starts without technology, without any industry, and is a subject state to one of the most powerful nations on Earth. This video is sponsored by Paradox Interactive and the new Sphere of Influence DLC, so support me and upgrade your V3 by checking out the link in the description box below. With Iron Man mode activated, it's time to jump into the jungles of West Africa in 1836. Liberia starts their campaign with a discount dictator that rules over no army, no navy, and a GDP of about 350. The world doesn't take us seriously, so we'll form an army by hiring a general and building barracks. In real-life history, Americans sent freed former slaves to Liberia through the American Colonization Society, but paradise did not await those that returned to the continent. Instead, more than half of those tricked into traveling back to Africa died to malaria and were a boat to get our revenge by building a navy to get us back to the USA. Texas is an excellent option, as they lack a large army and are at a war with Mexico, but we are also a protectorate of America, so befriending France might help us later gain independence. Malaria and mosquitoes are all over Africa, so we'll start off our tech tree by researching the quinine vaccine. Uncle Sam must feel guilty for sending us to certain death, as America is bankrolling us alimony, but at our income bracket, it's basically a coupon for a carton of jelly beans. Within North America, the Texan Republic captured Mexican General Santa Anna and secured a white peace, which gives us only 5 years before the Taco Bell tolls. Armed with only one regiment of line infantry and almost a piece of ship, we're in luck as Texas fired their entire army and fields only conscripts. It's either now or never, so we'll launch a diplomatic play to conquer their clay and pray that America stays out of our business. At least we have democracy with the passage of census suffrage, and fortunately the US will not get involved with our invasion. Politically, we'll push for elected bureaucrats to cut down on corruption, and by September, it was time for war. This is by far the smallest invasion force ever assembled in history and consists of the one guy that hasn't died of malaria, but where there's a will, we will know the way. The clock is ticking, and our army organization is too low to land at first, but thankfully no Texan conscripts were harmed in the making of this video, and Liberia occupied the Lone Star State without firing a single shot. We've got the jazz, and after 4 months of military rule, Sam Houston surrendered and gave our tribe called Quest the first portion of land within the New World. Our African Americans that came from Africa to be sent to America, to be sent back to Africa, are finally back in America and will integrate this territory and homeland of our primary culture. The Liberian path towards liberalization has led to liberté, égalité, and fraternité, but freedom isn't free, so we'll opt to expand our army. Bureaucracy is no longer about nepotism, so we'll attempt segregation next in an effort to accept more of our African brethren. Texas has wine, corn, cows, and no parasitical disease, which means that after incorporation, we will make it the capital of our nation. Iron is about the only thing that's better in Monrovia, and after we finished researching how to be racist, we'll opt for a police force to prevent any Caucasian insurrection. By 1839, enough time had passed to integrate Texas into our state, so naturally we'll swap our capital away from Mosquitoopolis and into a land of cough syrup and opportunity. This is America, and we've got that police lore on lockdown. Seek to put our serfs under their own turf, and it looks like we didn't tip our landlord, as we just might rent forever. Let's ban slavery instead. Just kidding, it just isn't happening either. Instead, we'll pursue colonial exploitation and build Texas A&M University because nothing says a degree in humanities quite like colonizing other human beings. Comanche, please, this land needs a tan, and you can believe whatever religion you want, but the evil empire of Washington has claimed Oklahoma, and Liberian-American relations are not okay. If you want peace, you must prepare for war, and Liberia needs a national militia, which was raised in under 1 year. Unfortunately for the POP, people of property, feudalism has no place in the 19th century, and despite our love for landlords, serfdom must be abolished. This process was far from easy, but eventually Liberians were free to farm their own holdings. Across our southern border, malevolent Mexicans were oppressing our Protestant brothers, so it was time to form the Anti-Mexican League, led by our national clergy. We're so poor we can't afford a single construction sector without running a deficit, so we'll create logging camps by punching trees without an axe. Haitians are basically Minecraft Steve and migrated en masse to Texas to work without tools, and public schools were doomed to fail. The only solution is to conquer Hawaii and attempt abolitionism, both surprisingly easy, as Hawaii fell in 1850, and despite a light case of revolution, Liberia had broken the chains of slavery 14 years before our own timeline. A unique opportunity presented itself in 1851 as America was preparing for war with Mexico. We need the other 6 flags of Texas, but why stop there when we can order a Rio Grande? By timing our declaration of war shortly after the Americans, we can hopefully avoid both them occupying these territories and soloing the massive armies of Santa Anna. We'll supply our 6,000 men with extra supplies and some blunts to go, and in April of '52, it's time to toke what we can. Liberian Marines successfully landed and occupied the Rio Grande, and Mexicans were no match for our soldier boys. While most of Mexico's forces were fighting Mormons in Utah, our Buffalo soldiers sliced into the Yucatan, and almost all of this Latino land was split between American and Liberian hand. At last, Texas was united, and we've secured both goodies and reparations, with which we'll use to develop Houston. Black Britons were welcomed with open arms, and women are now free to own property, so let's attempt to implement free trade and turn our attention south of the border. Smaller nations than ours still have slavery, so we'll wage war on the Catharinese to free our brothers from other mothers. The pen is mightier than the sword, and they blacked down without a fight, and for the first time in history, an African nation is spreading abolitionism throughout the world. Mexicans, however, care little for our righteous cause, and we must Latin X out their people until they admit defeat. Nothing says NAFTA like free trade, and Liberian Texas is open for business, but our attempts towards laissez-faire were about to get Atlas shrugged. You see, our overlord America demanded us to reshape the government under threat of war, and forcibly secularized our society, and the regime change meant that our economy wouldn't moon anytime soon. Instead, we'll attempt to be less racist and prevent Dixie discrimination. Disgruntled people of property orchestrated a revolution to abolish taxation, but they failed, and white people are now allowed in Liberian lounges. African Americans are only 10% of the total population, but with cultural acceptance increasing, our rates of assimilation will soon make us a black nation where one can assemble freely in public. The truce with Mexico was almost over, and Liberia needs a larger military if we are to expand further into Hispanic land, and besides, our GDP is 90% peso payments. Without these reparations in place, we have no economy to support our military, so the solution is simple: nosotros los gringos. The Latino legions have 2,000 more men and will surely win on land, but luckily Mexicans don't believe in navies, so we can split our forces and our navies to take full advantage of the naval invasion mechanic. Anytime Santa Anna assaulted Texas, we could simply use boats to recapture it 3 days later, while our Pacific Division kept the Mexicans busy by going from coast to coast. This tango of death lasted 3 miserable years of micromanaging invasions and liberations on a day-to-day basis. And of course, America demanded a regime change every 5 years, so we'll be seemingly stuck with feudalism forever. Santa Anna begged for a white peace, but we aren't white, and we're enjoying long walks on the beach. The tide turned in 1861 when Mexico City fell under occupation, and by this point we've been building so many barracks we actually outnumber the enemy without needing naval trickery. Victory ensured our country doubled in size, and while this land was largely worthless, the war reparations are worth it and allow us to afford an army of nearly 20,000 Liberians. We are rising up the ranks from number 159 in 1836 to number 49 in 1861, and are already an unrecognized regional power thanks to our force projection. Mesoamerica is filled with tiny tags that we can transform into tributaries, and Guatemala would become the first Liberian subject state. Honduras is next in line, and they brought in El Salvador as a +1, so we can take both and have tributary triplets. At last, our Afro-Liberians can afford construction sectors 30 years into the game, and it was time to make some coin on the American market. While far from ideal, adopting agrarianism at least rids our economy of tribal traditionalism, which will allow us to finally reform tax legislation. Vape Nation can't stop spamming us with regime changes, and if we stay subject to Uncle Sam, we'll never be able to pass laws or turn a profit. Enough is enough, and Liberia opted to abandon their factories to afford total war. While we can't demand independence because of our low liberty desire, we can demand land and the reparations needed to build a stronger foundation. And with no other nation involved, the First Liberian-American War commenced in 1966 AD. We're outnumbered 2-1 before the battle's even begun, so we're gonna have to be creative. Our split naval forces allow Liberia's Pacific Fleet to DIGG into Washington, while our Atlantic Armada ferries our forces into the other Washington, the enemy's capital. Aquatic guerrilla warfare would become our primary strategy, as the enemy had an upper hand on land. As long as Liberia held the District of Columbia, we would win eventually, and every time the enemy took Texas, we'd liberate our capital via coastal incursion. Liberian liberators looted their way across the Midwest unopposed, and as long as the White House had a black administration, the American nation would face certain capitulation. In less than 2 years, Liberia won their war to preserve their political autonomy, and, in reward, received Louisiana and Mississippi, released the Cherokee, and received reparations that would single-handedly cancel out the national deficit. The Native Americans were finally free, but some were freer than others, and with our high infamy, our Liberian liege decreed that the Maya shall be free from Mexico, though of course we also need their subscription fees. Liberian elections ushered in a protectionist president, which would allow us to push through economic interventionism. A landlord coup d'etat was thwarted, and Mexico was plundered like a piñata, with the Maya and Green falling free. Finally, our construction industries could now invest in more than a horse and donkey, and the Cherokee were filthy communists, though before we could expand further, we'd have to wait for our infamy to decay naturally, aka ridiculously slowly. Every Afro-Liberian can now access state-subsidized healthcare, and it's time to make an attempt to enact laissez-faire, arguably the best economic policy in Victoria III. With our truce expiring, we demanded the communist Cherokees to free our people, and they agreed, though the peasants attempted to secede. Fella please. An alliance with Spain would protect our nation from American predation, while our homies in Dahomey gave up the woman king, and finally joined our federation once we forced them to ban slavery. Haiti was next in line, and laissez-faire meant that our economy was at last on the path towards prosperity. Metal corporations enriched the Liberian economy, and Poverty Island bent the knee by 1877 AD. What was left of the Cherokee were put on trial, and their tears would grant us an okay state. Without American reparations, our economy faced stagnation, and we'd have to scale back construction. And with Maya now paying us for saving them, we could turn our attention back to the United Slavers of America. Liberian liberty was at hand, and it was time to be free from our slave sovereign's hand. So, nearly 100 years after the US's war for independence, we too would host a tea party, a Mr. Tea Party. Unsurprisingly, turds of a feather flocked together, and perfidious Albion joined our enemy, forcing us into war against two of the strongest great powers in the entire world. Liberians sought independence from slavery, reparations to fuel their growing economy, and the liberation of New Africa and California, as our unrecognized status meant taking land would cost too much infamy. Of course, leaving the American market also meant that our economy was running off blackjack and hookers, but we can always fix this with trade after the British wartime blockade. Initially, our African army held the advantage, and Russia, the eternal enemy of America, offered to pay off our debt, which we accepted without hesitation. But any semblance of a fair fight would end as the British sailed onto the stage. At least we have guaranteed the liberties of Liberians, and even won a battle or two, but against such overwhelming odds, we need to play dirty and engage in our tradition of California lovin'. To win a war against such insane odds, we'd instead send our men away from the front to let it fall, opting for a strategy of using small fleets to occupy and liberate from the coastlines. Of course, Britain's navy is 40 times larger than ours, but by timing it properly, we can pull in and out with ease. The enemy's soldiers had super speed and took our capital in Texas temporarily, but it takes two to tango, and occupying Washington will force the Americans into exhaustion as long as we can hold on. Odds are pretty bad, and the commies are calling for a revolution over workers' rights, but Liberians have a dream and will not surrender willingly. Anytime the capital was taken, they'd launch a naval invasion and restore the border, and surprisingly the British pulled out of the war, though no one knows why. This is a war of attrition, and despite failed invasions and an outnumbered navy, our war exhaustion would not lower as long as the Alamo held against the Americans. Our black brethren burned down the White House by evading the foe's fleet, and with Virginia under occupation, it was only a matter of days before Uncle Sam tapped out. African Americans from Africa and America are now free from American subjugation, and if that wasn't confusing enough, New Africa apparently ate Florida. But for the first time in recent history, American apology money granted us a positive treasury and put our economy back in the black. We are a civilized people, and President John Murray pities the 2 million fools that now threaten state stability. Nothing unites the people more than an external threat, and it was time for Mexico to pay their yearly dues of reparations. So war was declared and tacos were taken for the cause, granting us Zacatecas and Barrio plus a stimulus package. We're notorious and BIG, and our economy of war reparations is printing money, so it's time to stack construction and start a much-belated process of industrialization. Liberia's armed forces were now professional. Kaiser killed John Murray to take the presidency, and the Aztecs declared independence, though the outcome was entirely historical. Speaking of failed states, I've never seen a more pathetic Washington, D.C. 70% turmoil and a tiny population are all that's left after Liberia liberated this monument to slavery and man's depravity. With our budget balanced, thanks to reparations, we're no longer in debt and can finally afford iron tools for construction. We demanded California to abandon slavery, which they accepted without a fight, and we also demanded New Africa to abandon Florida, to which Shorty went low. Button was next on the bucket list and would make a fine tributary, but let's focus on the economy. We at last have steel-framed buildings, and there's no time for Stalin, as our production is about to go parabolic. Liberia needs a military-industrial complex to attain the power projection and prestige required for becoming an unrecognized major power. This is pivotal to Liberia's future, as in 1.7, this is now the only path towards earning diplomatic recognition, and thus an end to the plus 50% infamy modifiers preventing us from expanding efficiently. Expanding without recognition limits us to puppets and protectorates, and Africa awaited our scrambled eggs. The Horn of Africa and birthplace of humanity was now Liberian property, and proportional taxation meant that everyone would pay their fair share. You too would also pay tribute, and with American reparations over, it was time to bring an end to slavery in the United States as a pretext for another monthly payment plan. There's only two things a Liberian hates: people who are intolerant of other people's cultures, and the Dutch, who of course sided with slavery. It's time to Seattle this like civilized people, and by all accounts, the war was off to a great start. Through the use of under- and overground railroads, our African abolitionists snaked through the flyover states, breaking the chains of our brothers and setting our people free. The United Slave Masters of America were not long for this world, and in under 2 years of fighting, slavery was banned forevermore, reparations were re-enabled, and we even received a Brazilian tributary for our trouble. Of course, the Dutch were still breathing, but our inability to land our men into the International Court of Justice meant that they'd walk from their crimes, and we'd have to sign a white peace with the swamp Germans. For us to obtain diplomatic recognition, we'd have to become friends with a great power at +80 relations minimum, and while there's nothing great about Britain, we'd befriend them out of situational necessity. The price of being unrecognized means that we'll receive a flat +50% infamy to all of our diplomatic plays, so it's time to open trade with the UK and Berlin, while at home, our politicians sought to replace religion with atheism. Nietzsche was right, and our people are at last free from the oppression of organized religion, but Catholic Austrians objected and declared war for our West African homeland. These insolent inbreds with Habsburgers lacked any semblance of a navy to enforce their war goal, and our liberators were too few in number to secure a beachhead in Italy, so we can safely ignore this matter entirely. Luckily for the Liberians, our relations with England have finally reached the maximum of 50 via improving relations, and we can now request an embassy to push us to the required +80 needed for full diplomatic recognition. Thus, in October of 1899 AD, Liberia opened an embassy in London and fulfilled the requirements of recognition, leading to the Liberian-British Treaty of Commerce and Navigation and our ticket to a new century of expansion without pesky infamy. A warm Happy New Year to you at the turn of the 20th century. Liberian Texas has come a long way since we've returned from African exile, and now that we're a recognized state, we can finally reclaim our homeland territories without inflated infamy. Georgia was on our mind, but those without melanin modifiers demanded Oklahoma, starting yet another war with America. We welcomed all of our brothers with open arms, and Atlanta was annexed mostly peacefully, but US imperialism was back on the menu, and it was time to yeet the Yanks. Our Afro-American Liberian armies can by now easily outpower whatever Washington throws at us, and with triple encirclement, the war was over. Arkansas was now African, Pueblans and Mormons were independent, reparations were returned, and white people fled our country for southern Spain. Liberian libs were outraged and called for revolution, while states' rights slavemongers attempted to secede as the Confederate States. Unfortunately for the libs and the rebs, our nation was one of democratic moderation, and the nation of Dixie was no more, and the revolution had waned into obscurity. Our growing industry needed more territory, and Florida and his man would fall by 1903 AD. To mitigate infamy, our navy opted to puppet Shaka and his Zulu warriors, and achieved victory by banning slavery and enacting reparations. Humorously, the poorest of our nation were those of Caucasian persuasion, and their sweat and tears powered the progress of the world's 7th largest economy. But white trickery knows no shame, and the Americans pulled a Paris Commune on us to avoid paying their monthly reparations, as the now substantially smaller USA was only paying a fraction of what they originally owed. The Communist States of America vowed to unite all Americans in ending Liberian reparation payments, and stormed the ruins of Washington, D.C., sending thousands of white liberals fleeing and into our Texan lands. The US had fallen into red hands, and Russia offered to sell us Alaska, which we accepted, only to later find that their kulaks were starving from deprivation. Communist America had now taken vanilla America's space, and without the former's truce in place, it was time to rival the syndicalists and declare a war of humiliation to return our rightful reparations. Communism never changes, but capitalism can, and in 1907, Liberia enacted workers' protections without succumbing to socialism. If it's red, it's dead, and the war started easily enough, but this time things would be different. By land and by sea, Liberian liberation forces mobilized in an attempt to secure the communist capital of Chicago. The advent of electricity brought our democracy to the 20th century, and sponsorship of positivist humanism meant that we were nearing the next stage of our evolution. Crimson Caucasians were flooding into the Liberian homeland, and women were granted the right to vote to prevent them from falling prey to linen sway. The Liberian tradition of landing in Oregon and reverse trailing relieved pressure from the front lines, and any loss of our coastal counties could be fixed by naval invasions. 250,000 colorless communists and African capitalists died in this war, but Liberia needs American reparations to keep their economy and society alive. When the communists bent their knee, the Pacific Northwest was also freed, and rubles flew into our national treasury to assist in reconstruction. We have socialism at home, but efforts to enact multiculturalism have resulted in Republicans seceding from the Union. Florida man must be stopped before this gets out of hand, and Liberia passed through the legislation despite the reactionary insurrection. The Pueblo people were vassalized for their own protection, and the revolution was over. Democracy and the rights of man would prevail, and our increasingly humanitarian ethos invited in millions of exploitable workers, also known as refugees. Every month, hundreds of thousands of people arrived in Houston to call Liberia their new home, and every single ethnicity was now assimilating into African American. The specter of communism had failed, and it was time for a celebration while renewed industrialization powered by the tears of tankies fueled our GDP. Reaching 100 million GDP as a recognized African superpower is victory enough for me, and this coincided with Tonga time, so it's time to take an in-depth view into our society, economy, and the world as Liberia enters into the 20th century. In December of 1914, our African-American administration spans from Alaska and Hawaii to the west to South Carolina in the east, and has the 7th largest market and economy in the entire world. Our black market leads the world in the production of sulfur, glass, and paper, and also has sizable warship, lead, explosives, sugar, steel, and iron industries. Our construction sector can build entire cities out of thin air, and British foreign investment is ripe for future forced nationalization. Liberia's population of 27 million makes it the 10th most populated polity in the world, and with nearly 10 million African Americans, 35% of our population are black, with 500,000 more added every year. Multiculturalism and its consequences has led to a Mayan Mississippi and a Manchu majority in our former West African homeland. Our democratic republic is currently run by William Joblin, and our laws are objectively the most progressive in the entire world. Nearly everyone can vote, there is no discrimination, there is freedom from religion, free and fair elections, and guaranteed liberties. Economically, we've chosen neoliberalism, fairly tax the rich and the poor, and while we haven't defunded the police, we do have free schooling and universal health care. Human rights are ensured for all Liberians. Children study in schools instead of the mines, women can vote, and most importantly, slavery is relegated to the dustbin of history. Our standard of living is the 11th best in the world. 75% of Liberians are literate, and census data shows that African atheist laborers and engineers have the power in our polity. Speaking of religion, almost everyone wears a fedora, though our original homeland is Chinese Confucian on account of Manchu madness. Alright dudes, this timeline has an unusually high amount of anomalies, and it's time to explore the rest of the world. In Europe, Portugal is owned by Austria, half of Italy is owned by France, and the capital of France is owned by communists, who are all about that Mao Zedong diet. Northern and southern Germans control almost all of Central Europe. The Ottomans are still alive, though the Egyptians are eating them, and Greece is free to fall into debt, as is tradition. Back in America, Canada is a technocracy, America is communist, and Brazil is eating everything and everyone. But perhaps the most ridiculous outcome of this campaign is the Heavenly Kingdom, a Chinese Christian state that has single-handedly converted millions of Confucians to Protestant Christianity. Our own subjects include Button, Dahomey, El Salvador, Guacamole, Haiti, Honduras, Argentina, Maya, Pueblo, Rio Grande's Republic of Yuan Zulu, which makes us the 7th greatest power in the entire world. Our capital, Texas, is the most populated western state in existence. Howdy, y'all. And before you hit the dusty trail, be sure to let me know in the comment box below what nation you'd like to see in the next Victoria 3 video. Support AlzaboHD for free by subscribing to the channel and liking the video. These videos take a very long time to create and produce, and your support is always appreciated. This video was sponsored by Paradox Interactive, and you should check out Victoria 3's New Sphere of Influence DLC, the highest rated expansion and a highly regarded extension to the base game. Get Spheres of Influence today through my link in the description box below to support your YouTuber bro. Honestly guys, I had a ton of fun playing Victoria 3 for this campaign, so let me know if you'd like to see future V3 content. There's also a CK3 castration challenge video coming soon, and if you want to make the cut of the credits, support AlzaboHD by becoming a channel member or by joining my Patreon.